Hello. Hello everyone, hello. Sister Susan and Brother Greg, you both would have met each other. Brother Greg, Sister Susan is Sister Susan and wife of Brother Raju, both of whom were the ones who made food the first time when you were at the venue. Sister Susan, that's my mom. Hello, Hafsa. Brother Darren, hello. Cool, let's give maybe 5 more minutes or so. Let's see. I do apologize for the very short break. Apologies. Let me check. What's there? Let me quickly just transition. Quickly keep this here. We'll be able to see. Hello, hello. Hello everyone again. Cool, shall we start? I understand not everyone has joined again. For the yes, we are starting again. Please let's give them a nudge. In the meantime, praise the Lord. How delayed will we? Cool. Let's just give 3 more minutes, please. I don't want people to miss the first section, first 10 minutes or so, which is the important section for people to understand the context. So let's just give 3 more minutes, please, and get started. In the meantime, let me show you the content here, so you can sort of take that in, and let me also, yeah, brother, was it Brother Steve? Brother Steve, yes. So yeah, module 2 assessments. We have 4 questions. I think at least 2 or 3 of them are fairly involved, but should help you think through things properly. I do appreciate that some might find it hard. So one thing we can plan, which hopefully we'll plan in the on Monday or Tuesday, God strengthening. I'm catching up with the core team anyway on Sunday. So let's try and see if we can have a Zoom meeting to sort of discuss any issues that you are having, and hopefully help you. Okay, how are we doing in terms of okay, interesting. Brother Greg is asking. I thought you were joking about something, Brother Greg. Why is the priest barefoot? Again, remove your sandals is something which the Lord instructed Moses, Joshua to do. Where God is, you can't have dead leather, and it's assumed that most likely their footwear was leather based. And that's one of the reasons. Dead leather, you can't have dead things. Anything which corresponds to sin apart from the rough idea of who a human being is, can't really show up in the presence of God. I mean, I don't want to mention details, but essentially, the priest can't show there's a particular point where priests are not through which God ensured that people don't even show their nakedness before God, because again, nakedness is indicative of the fact of sin. Before sin, how would they have looked like is a different question. But Brother Darren is saying he couldn't find all the links, but session 2, spiritual history, is that the right link? Okay, so hopefully even if you couldn't find on your own, you have found what Brother Darren has sent. Okay, let's get started. And let me show you. So this is what we're going to cover in session 2. A spiritual history, roughly history, but more crucially, I want to focus on the spiritual ramifications of different things, the important things that the nation of Israel did. And that's the target for right now. So we've started 15 minutes late. Supposed to finish at quarter to 3, but quarter to 3. But let's see how we go. 15 minutes late, 1 hour, 2:30. Okay, let's see how things go. Okay, in terms of spiritual history, roughly what we are going to cover, I'll show you this. Roughly what we're going to cover is, we're going to see why God chose the nation of Israel. Why should He choose any nation? Can't He do some sort of a magic way in which He can save the world? Why did He have to choose a nation, and why Israel in particular? Is the first thing we're going to ask. And the second thing is, what did He expect? What was His commitment to Israel in the process of what He wanted to accomplish through Israel? What was His commitment? How did He see Israel? How did He relate to Israel, and so on? What did He expect from Israel in terms of target? Where did He want Israel to reach? And then we're going to see in the umpteen number of ways in which Israel messed up big time, and therefore didn't go where God intended Israel to go. But God did manage to accomplish some of the other things that He wanted to accomplish through Israel. And so maybe we can wrap things up by asking a few questions as to what the implications are for Christians quickly. So that is the rough idea. Why did He choose a nation? Why Israel? How did He want to relate to Israel? What was His commitment? What did He expect out of Israel? And how many different ways Israel messed up. in. So let's look at the content again there. Covenantal background. Why did he choose Israel? What did he want to accomplish? Goal. But he knew a rough idea. He had an idea that they were going to mess up. Prediction. The relationship he wanted to have with them, and the catalog of issues they ran into, and essentially as a result of all these, where did they end up in? So that's what we're going to cover roughly. Why did God have to choose a nation? Why did he choose Israel in particular? Before showing some verses, I wanted to briefly give you a context there. There was at least two different major things God wanted to accomplish, and in the second major thing there are finer attributes, two or three finer attributes, but two major things God wanted to accomplish. Number one, he really was pleased with the person called Abraham, who later became Abraham. He was pleased and he wanted to reward him, and that was one thing. He wanted Abraham to receive a reward in this world, not during his time, but in this world. And so he had to, that's one. Number two is, he really wanted a nation through which he can communicate he can do two or three different things. Number one, he can demonstrate his love, his character, his commitment. Number one. Number two, he can use them as trainees for them to understand how much human beings mess up. And thirdly, he wanted a carrier for the Messiah, a channel for the Messiah to come. Three reasons there. Demonstrate love, commitment, his character, and so on. Help them understand they are sinful. Thirdly, for the Messiah to come, for there to be a nation. And so God had to choose a nation. Which nation did he choose? He chose Israel. And the reason he chose Israel was he had to choose some descendants of Abraham. But as long as he chooses any, he would still be rewarding Abraham. And his choice was Israel. His choice wasn't all of the descendants of Isaac. His choice wasn't all of the descendants of Abraham. For reasons related to for some particular preferences he had. He wanted to reward faith, not some human ideas. And so he didn't choose all of the descendants of Abraham. He chose only Isaac. And when it came to Isaac, he didn't choose all of the descendants of Isaac. He only chose Jacob. So through Jacob, if he blesses Jacob, he was going to reward Abraham. So there you go. Someone from Abraham to reward Abraham. And of course, like I said, through Israel, he was going to demonstrate who he is, his character, and that is why he gave a law to explain, for people to understand where he was coming from. So they understand when they messed up big time. So they can understand what sin is. He also, of course, communicated prophecies about the salvation to come through Messiah. And so he used them as a vessel for the Messiah to come. And he used them physically also as a family from where Jesus could be, where Jesus could be born. So he accomplished those purposes also. So that's the entire context of why any nation, why one particular nation, Israel, and what he was going to do through that nation. Okay, now let's actually go through the covenantal background. What did he commit to Abraham, and what exactly did he fulfill? And so that sort of background. If we go to that background, the link still doesn't work for some reason. Abraham received a covenant even when he was Abraham at the early stage of his life, and the covenant was, Abraham, if only you listen to me, i.e. get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, if you listen to me and go in faith. I'm not even going to tell you where, but as long as I tell you go, you go. So to a land, but when you're near that land, I'll tell you where you are. So to a land I will show you. I will make you, if you do that, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. You shall be a blessing. So there are plenty of things there. You shall be a blessing. All the families of the earth shall be blessed. Those aren't strictly through Israel. Those are strictly through the cross of Jesus, which also is of course through Israel, in a manner. But the main thing through Israel, or to Israel, was through Abraham. To Abraham he gave a promise: I'll make you a great nation. A great nation including land, a nation with land. Genesis chapter 17, 1-8. As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father. This is after Ishmael is born. So now Abraham has multiple children, but God really didn't want them to be treated as one. He wanted to treat them as two. He really didn't want to do anything with Ishmael. He wanted to take only Isaac. So now, and therefore he has to make them many nations. So now you become I'll make you father of many nations, and I'm changing your name, not just as father, but father of many. For I made you father of many nations. Those are by the way, the meanings of the names Abraham and Abraham. I will make nations of you, kings shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between you, me and you and your descendants, for an everlasting covenant. I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are stranger. So the land also he said he was going to give. And he confirmed the covenant was not through Ishmael but through Isaac. After Isaac, the covenant was going to come through Jacob. And also God said to him, even though Isaac had Esau, another son, God only met Jacob to sort of make him the inheritor of the covenant. I hope all of you can see properly. Okay, cool. What did he say? Also God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you. A company of nations, not independent nations, but a company together moving around as one nation. And kings shall come from your body. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac I give to you. In other words, the promise which I gave Abraham and to Isaac, you are the inheritor, not Esau. You. And so God gives Jacob. How did God fulfill that in Moses? Exodus 3. Or how did God intend to fulfill that in Moses? Exodus 3, 7-10. Slaves, God is choosing the slaves, Israel. And he's saying, so I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrow. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and Hittites, which is where Abraham was asked to roam around, to say, your descendants are going to acquire, get this land, inherit this land, so please walk around, move around, explore. And that's what Abraham did. And God now comes almost 500 years later, after Israel had gone into slavery, after the significance of Joseph, famine, and moving to Egypt and becoming slaves later. That place of the Canaanites and Hittites and Amorites and Perizzites and Hivites and Jebusites, that land I am going to give to you. This is where God is now choosing a nation. What was so far a family, now is going to make a nation with a land. And so that's where partially, what is God fulfilling here? I will make you a great nation, was a prophecy given. Make you a great nation. I'll make you father of many nations, one of which would be Israel. And that partially is being fulfilled in the Mosaic covenant. Now, of course, the remaining part there is, I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, would automatically come in for any of these people, descendants of Abraham, the inheritors of the covenant. But in particular, when it says, through you I shall bless the world, that in particular, you shall be a blessing. I will in you all the families, in you, in your seed, in you, and that is in particular talking about Jesus Christ. Okay, so partial fulfillment of Mosaic covenant, in Mosaic covenant, partial fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham in the Abrahamic covenant happened in the Mosaic covenant. Exodus 19:3-8 we see all that the Lord has. But what he did also is when he chose this nation, of course he really wanted to make sure that this nation took what he was giving them seriously. So he said, he said, oh, let's sign a deal. And this is Mount Sinai. Exodus 19, Mount Sinai. Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain. Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself, and therefore obey. I wanted to bless Abraham, and that's why I'm taking you. But now, for your own person, I can accomplish what I want to accomplish in and through you. Even if you rebel, I can still accomplish what I want to accomplish. I can still make you a great nation, and therefore satisfy the promise I gave to Abraham. And I can still use your womb. We use one of your ladies to bring in the Messiah. Even if the entire nation is rebellious, even if one lady is there, I can still do things. But I want your welfare, and therefore I am saying obey. Keep my covenant. I want you to learn. I want you to see how I satisfy my covenant. I want you to try to satisfy the covenant to the best of your ability, so you can understand when you fail that every human being is failing. So he's doing all that. If you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and holy nation. And then he goes on to say all that the Lord has. They went on. They said, so Moses came and called for the elders. They said, oh, you know what? We know God is speaking through you. We can hear God speak. We can see the thunderings and lightnings and so on. So we are saying, we are willing to sign. And this is what they said. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. In other words, both the parties have now signed the deal. The covenant is in place. So you can see that idea. Lest you forget the Lord. So yeah, the idea of a covenant being established as a result of the promise given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A covenant being established with the nation of Israel, repeated in multiple places. In other words, it's a fulfillment of a promise given earlier. Cool. So I'm going to skip a few verses in the interest of time. You see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, what kind of origin did they have? As you would appreciate, like I said earlier, Israel's history is unrivaled, unparalleled in the history of the nations across the world. And that is in the fact that God showed up in very many demonstrably verifiable ways. God showed up. And that is why God expected good obedience from them. So unparalleled, and that's where unparalleled expectation also comes in. What kind of things? We know, of course, of the 10 plagues with which the Lord destroyed Egypt in the view of the nation of Israel. Supernatural, unparalleled, unrivaled. He did that, and then the Red Sea splitting, manna from heaven, quail from heaven, quail supernaturally. So all sorts of different such things. And that's why Deuteronomy 4 says, did any people ever hear the voice of God? At Mount Sinai, where God showed up, even before the Ark of the Tabernacle. Did any people ever hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard, and live? Or did God ever try to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of any other nation? By trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, according to all that the Lord your God did for you in Egypt. In other words, your birth is unparalleled, and therefore when God says, better obey, you better obey. When God says, do not cross this line, if you do, I'll kill you, or I'll ask someone else to kill you, you better obey, because this is unparalleled revelation, and therefore expectation is really high. What was the goal? God wanted to take the nation of Israel, take them into Canaan, of course use them to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish, but also make them benefit also. God didn't want to use them. He could have purely used them to reward Abraham, with them all being destroyed. gradually perhaps. Use them for as a childbearing vehicle for Jesus. Use them to understand, for them to stand up and testify, we are sinners, we give up. He could have done that. But what he did was, no, I want your welfare also. As I am trying to accomplish a few other things, I want you to get rest. You come out of slavery, now I'm going to give you eternal rest. By the way, this rest, this is where we're going to say, we have topics of about Calvinism and so on, the dynamics of salvation, what does God intend for things, for people to go through, and what goes through and what happens, and so on. So the point here is, God's intention for the nation of Israel was for them to get rest, and the New Testament clearly says, Hebrews chapter 2 I think, or maybe 3, clearly says Israel did not get into that rest, and we know that from the rest of this session and the next session. God predicted things. If you go through Deuteronomy 31, by that time Israel had rebelled in all sorts of different ways. They had shown their displeasure. I don't know if you're familiar, if you know anything about what happened after the 10 plagues. When they came in front of Red Sea, they murmured. They said, Moses, why did you bring us here? Is it for us to be killed, destroyed? Why did you do this? We could have died there in Egypt as slaves. In other words, they were constantly murmuring. They did, even though they saw all the signs and wonders, they couldn't project their past experience onto future. They really couldn't say, we have a supernatural God who could supernaturally do things here. They really couldn't do that. They really couldn't convert their past experience into future prediction. So they murmured multiple times. Even at the early stages, I went into idolatry, all sorts of issues. And because of that, God saw all those things happening, and God would have seen their hearts even before that, when they were still slaves. And God would have realized their quality of their heart is not that high. They're really people who are very dull. So you can tell stuff and then be okay sort of people. I'm sorry, I don't want to undermine the nation of Israel. They are a treasure before God, and the word of God says, I'll bless those who bless you. So I do apologize for making that funny expression, but my point is, God clearly says they were dull of hearing. Okay. With that, prediction. What did God predict? So we find Deuteronomy 31. We find, then it shall be, when many evils and troubles have come upon them, when they run into all sorts of trials and whatever, that this song shall, so he gave a song, for I know that the inclination of their behavior today, I know their hearts, they are very evil, even before I have brought them out of the land of which I swore to give them. They seem to be very faithless, dull, and so on. So that he predicted that happening. So if you go through Deuteronomy 31, you would see a clear prophecy based on, after having looked at Israel's behavior, where God was saying these people are going to mess up big time. Okay, anyway, in terms of relationship, what did God want with them? So we saw with Israel, it was the promise given to Abraham, which God fulfilled partially, in and through Israel. But even as he was fulfilling past promises and so on, he still wanted Israel to flourish, not just to survive, but to flourish. But then he is seeing things which are not really great. So in terms of relationship, how did God see Israel? I'm going to quickly go through some of these things. God saw Israel as his firstborn son. To an extent, he was saying, if you don't let my son go, and this is to the Pharaoh and the Egyptians, if you don't let my son go, I'll kill your sons. And this is where the 10th plague, the 10th plague comes in. I'll kill your son because this is my firstborn son. Israel is a special treasure to me above all people, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. They are mine, they are my own. Special people. He will set you above all nations, best among nations, which he has made in praise, in name, and in honor, that you may be holy to the Lord your God, just as he has spoken. This day you have become the people of the Lord your God. So essentially, Israel God, in the way God saw Israel, He really had a very special place for the nation of Israel, which He still has, even though they have broken the covenant, because some of the promise that He gave Abraham was a promise to Abraham, and so the keeping of that promise in relation to Israel is one-sided. Even if Israel completely disobeys, God would still keep His promise, because the promise was made to Abraham, not to Israel. Because of Abraham faithfully living his life, God still has to fulfill His promise to Abraham. Therefore, Israel flourishes. Israel has flourished in the past, and Israel flourishes even today. They have periods where they had issues, but those where God was chastening them as children. Okay, that's the background. Now, in terms of issues, how did Israel behave? I did say that in the Mosaic law you have all sorts of different things. Don't kill, don't have sexual immorality, don't kidnap, all sorts of different things. We went through how you present yourself before God, how you quarantine yourself if you have issues, what kind of food you have, how you treat your neighbors, how you treat your servants, all sorts, widows, orphans, all sorts. What we're going to find, idolatry, don't serve other gods, and so on, all sorts of different contractual obligations. But what we're going to find now is Israel as a nation as a whole. Individually they ran into all sorts of issues, but even as a nation they were unparalleled in that they messed up big time, almost in every single way possible. And that's what we're going to see right now, quickly. And let's look at this. What kind of issues did Israel, the nation of Israel, run into? A catalog of issues. They rebelled multiple times. Idolatry. They served other gods. They were dull of heart. They lacked faith. Entered into all sorts of sexual immorality, even as a nation. When I say as a nation, I don't mean every single one, but generally, many people. They did not even obey the conquest regulation. God had given particular instruction as to how they need to conquer the land of Canaan. They didn't even satisfy that. They dishonored in multiple different ways. They mistreated the ark of the covenant, which had to be held in high esteem. Well, high esteem would be a mild way of putting it, because this is God, reverence. But they didn't do that. At multiple times they didn't handle the ark properly. They rejected God as king, even though it's supposed to be a theocracy. They rejected God from having a proper theocracy in place. They had incest, they murdered, they didn't keep their oaths, they intermarried foreigners. They built one of the commandment is actually, when the Lord takes them into a land, they had to have only in Jerusalem a temple, but they built high places all over the place, and many of these high places were for different other gods. Some of them were purported to be for Yahweh, but Yahweh wouldn't recognize that. But many of them are for other gods. They inquired of foreign gods, as if Yahweh can't speak, even though none of the other gods can speak. They inquired of foreign gods. They had sinful offerings. They destroyed the temple. They sacrificed their children, and they didn't keep regulations related to giving rest to the land or servants and so on. So in multiple, like you can see, it's a catalog of issues. It's almost, they ill-treated God, they ill-treated their fellow human beings, they ill-treated, they didn't have justice, they ill-treated foreigners, all sorts of things. In other words, what else can go wrong? They've gone wrong in all sorts of different ways. Let me go through it. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I really wanted to go through a quick sort of historical summary, chronological, of the crucial aspects. We understand during the start of their time they rebelled. Red Sea rebelled. They were thirsty, they rebelled. Murmured, rebelled. They were given manna from heaven, and they were told, don't go attempt to fetch on the Sabbath day, rest day. They still went. Some of them still went ahead. Dull of heart, they didn't comprehend. Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days. They were already fed up. Made a golden calf. Idolatry. The lack of faith. God said, okay, now go conquer Canaan. This is how I'm going to lead you. And then he sent spies to spy out, to bring back reports. What did they come back with? Apart from 2 spies, they said, oh really, we can't do this. Canaan has giants. We are grasshoppers before them. We really can't do this. What they failed to understand is that, well, so far they couldn't have crossed the Red Sea also. They couldn't have got food right through that period of Exodus so far. They couldn't have got any of those if not for the help of God. But God was moving with them. A pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. God was going with them. Despite that, they had the audacity to say, we really can't do this. And so lack of faith, serious lack of faith, rebellion. At some stage they said, when they were hungry, they said, oh, could we not have had food in Egypt? Why did you bring us here to die? God had to do something to destroy them. And then while they were being destroyed, he also gave a way out, which is a bronze serpent, which is the only other caveat apart from the Ark of the Covenant, which is made in the image of something in the heaven or the earth. Apart from these 2, strictly there was no instruction to make anything else. But this particular Ark of the Covenant was intended to be for a longer term. This particular thing was intended to be made for a short term. But guess what? They had that for hundreds of years after this was made, to treat it as an idol, and God wasn't happy. So rebellion, sexual immorality. They entered into a nationwide, almost, I can't say if every single individual was involved, but seemingly a very widespread sexual immorality, which was combined with spiritual immorality. Many times in the Old Testament, because the practices of the predecessors of the land of Canaan and neighboring countries, what we understand is their gods and their theological ideas are also involved sexual malpractices, engaging in all sorts of weird and ungodly sexual acts. Therefore you many times you would see when it says that, you could, depending on the context, you could actually take idolatry also, and when it takes idolatry, it's possible that involved sexual immorality also. That's how those 2 were tied, and that's what you find in Numbers 25, Balaam incident. And by the way, some of these things are going to be New Testament, some New Testament items which we need to check also. Conquest regulations. They were asked to drive out Canaanites. They refused. They did not. They didn't do it. I don't know, maybe they were too tired. They wanted rest, so they didn't do it. So God at some stage said, you know what, I had committed earlier that I was going to drive them out, but now that you have disobeyed, I am not going to drive them out. They are going to be thorns on your side. Remember earlier I said God had intended to give the nation of Israel rest, but this was the turning point. Because they did not drive out, even though they had rebelled at multiple points before that, at least if they had stuck to the conquest regulation properly, God would have given them, there would have been a high chance for God to have given them rest. Why? What is the detail behind this conquest regulation? And here is where Muslims would try and say, oh, even Israel had these things. They went and committed genocide and so on. Completely taken out of context. For starters, Israel never ever went on a territory expansion strategy. They were given a small portion of land, and that's all they cared about. Never ventured out. But Islam is completely opposite. They're always on the run, always on the expansion mode. And that in itself is a huge ocean of difference. But even then, why was Israel involved in this? Why did God instruct them, give them as a law to conquer in that special time period? And the particular land he had in mind. Why did he do that? Because apart from the various things God wanted to accomplish through the nation of Israel, he also wanted to judge the Canaanites. They had all sorts of abominable practices, including but not limited to sexual immorality, highly connected with spiritual immorality, and being as callous, as willing to offer your children as sacrifices on fire. That's how dangerous and callous those people were. God was extremely gracious to them, gave them at least 400 years. After they had began their practice, they had at least 400 years to really prove that they really were into it. Or alternatively, they could have said, you know what, we really don't want to do this anymore, come out. 400 years time, they continued. And therefore God really wanted to bring in judgment, and Israel was the tool which was supposed to be used. And so you find when Israel did not do that, it's not because God was thinking, oh, you're not going to get the land now, but it's rather, I really wanted to bring in this judgment, and you haven't done that, and therefore this is serious rebellion, and I'm not going to drive them out. You're going to learn practices from them. You're going to become as bad as they are, if not worse, and I'm going to judge you also for those things. They dishonored Eli, a priest of God, who is supposed to be a leader for the nation before the time of Samuel, by the way. He, in the book of Samuel, he dishonored God and how did he dishonor God? He really, his sons did all sorts of sexually immoral acts and bribery in the temple, but he knew about it, but he really didn't have the courage to stop them. And this is bad parenting, but God saw this well beyond bad parenting, which is he really didn't take God as seriously as he took his sons. In other words, he didn't want to hurt his sons, but he wanted to hurt God in the place of hurting his sons. And so God saw this as dishonor, and therefore we don't have a Eli based priestly line. We rather have from outside of Eli, Aaronic priests. If Eli had stuck to God carefully, all the priests would have been from Eli today. Anyway, mistreatment of the ark, rejection of God as king. God led the nation of Israel 40 years in the wilderness. During the period of Judges, for about 390 years or so, God led them through various judges, but none of them were kings. In other words, people can clearly see this nation was being led by God and not some guy who sits on a throne with a crown in a huge palace. No, if you had gone to Israel during that time, Israel would just have been a group of farmers or farming, those kinds of people. You wouldn't have seen anyone who is like a king. And the reason is God was the king. But they refused to stick with that plan. They said, we need a king just like the other nations. And this is where Israel was given Saul as a king. And this is one of the reasons why even in module 2 we saw that people failed to appreciate some of the evidence we have for period before the Iron Age corresponding to Israel's existence, because they don't realize Israel wasn't a traditional kingdom in the way many other kingdoms are and were, but Israel was a theocracy, and God did not care about worldly pomp, but he cared about spiritual pomp. Anyway, but they rejected God. King Saul disobeyed as a king. When leaders disobey, that messes up the entire nation. King Saul disobeyed. In the case of Amalekites, God wanted him to wipe out. He didn't do it. There was incest in King David's family. As a king, David, as a king, he should have sorted that out. He didn't, and he didn't properly. So there were issues. As a nation, they didn't keep their oath properly. leaders of the nation entered into sexually immoral acts and murder. Solomon was the first one to mess up the nation big time. He had all sorts of foreign wives, and through them all sorts of foreign gods served within the nation of Israel. Serious immorality introduced by this king. Idolatry, high places outside Jerusalem. Again, no one was supposed to build anything like a temple outside of Jerusalem. By the way, the context here is until Solomon's time, you had a united kingdom. Solomon's son, King Rehoboam, was the first ruler who ruled only briefly in a united kingdom, but during his time the kingdom was split into northern Israel and southern Judah. God said only Jerusalem should have a temple. Jeroboam was the first king of northern Israel, and he wasn't happy with that plan, because if people left northern Israel and went to southern Judah to Jerusalem to worship, of course they might not maintain proper allegiance to him, and so he wanted to build high places outside of Jerusalem within the territory of northern Israel, and have various idols. So in other words, for political gains, he messed up the nation of northern Israel. Some intermittent good things that happen. I haven't listed all of the good things, but some intermittent good things. God sent prophets to. There was a particular prophet who came and destroyed at least one of the altars that Jeroboam had. His hand withered, and so on. So interesting passage for you to read later. After messing up big time in northern Israel and southern Judah during the time of Solomon, which carried on in the time of Rehoboam also, during Prophet Azariah and Prophet, there are multiple prophets, by the way, which most Christians might not even have heard of. But in this module I haven't given the exhaustive list, but I've quoted some of those names. For example, Prophet Azariah, Prophet Oded. Most wouldn't know about, but they re-established the covenant, destroyed all foreign altars, and so on. King Ahab came after that from a new dynasty in northern Israel, from the dynasty of Omri. Again, intermarriage with the Sidonian Jezebel. By the way, Balaam, who led Israel to sexual immorality here, and Jezebel here are seen as templates even for issues in the church, or what is supposed to be the church. And it is very important for us to ask, who are these people, what is this pattern, and what portion of what is supposed to be the church is following these patterns. And you'll be surprised as to what the findings are. Jezebel, a foreign lady coming into Israel and leading Israel into all sorts of sexual and spiritual immorality, and turning the nation away from God. A foreign lady bringing in her practices, turning the nation away, and this would sort of ring a bell already to you based on some of the discussions we've been having, we had in the previous session. Let me quickly check if everything is all right. Cool. Yes, I see some comments there, but okay, no major issue, that's fine. Prophet Elijah stood up on Mount Carmel and destroyed the prophets of Baal who Jezebel had introduced. He killed them all after a challenge in Mount Carmel, and he brought fire from heaven. I know we in our group chat we were talking about whether we understand, whether we appreciate that Prophet Elijah is supposed to come in the future also. Part of the template for what to expect comes from here. Jehoshaphat, who was a king in Judah, southern Judah, he again, after the times of Solomon and Rehoboam and so on, after those times, he really appointed teachers to teach the law of God, with an intention, of course, for people to follow the law. But Jehoshaphat also messed up later, in that he became a friend of Ahab, where Ahab messed up big time. So God expected even unholy friendships not to happen, and God was unhappy with the fact that Jehoshaphat was a friend with Ahab. But Jehoshaphat did some other good things, like he removed some of the other idols. There was a king called Ahaziah who inquired of a foreign god, as if Yahweh can't speak and as if there were no prophets in Israel. Murder within family. Jehu was a king who also was destroyed later on, ended up being destroyed, of northern Israel, who began being good when he actually started a new dynasty, rule of a new dynasty in northern Israel, by killing the family of Ahab and Jezebel. But he destroyed all the Baal worship centers in northern Israel. Baal destroyed from southern Judah, and the temple was rebuilt. And from that, of course, we appreciate the temple ran into severe repair before that. But now, because of lack of use, because everyone was focused on Baal worship. Would you believe, in Israel, people of worship were focused on Baal worship to an extent the temple fell into repair and was rebuilt by a priest, not even by a king. During that time, there was an interesting situation politically. There was a child who was reared up to be a king later, and his mom was messing up briefly, big time. And then Joash revived temple service. Leaders leave the house of God and served images. A complete abandonment of service to God. Amaziah serves the god of Edom. Uzziah began to be a good king, but then ended up, towards the end of his life, he was a bad king because a few disobedient things. Again, we're going to check out the lessons for the church today, and these are all going to be come in very handy. Destruction of the temple and severe idolatry. Ahaz of southern Judah was the single most influential man because of whom God gave up on Judah. Ahaz gathered and cut articles he went deliberately to destroy. At least so far they left, and in other words, they didn't deliberately destroy, just allowed it to fall into disrepair. Not that those things are permissible, but this guy cut articles in the house of the Lord, shut the doors of the house of the Lord. He served the gods of Damascus, made altars in every corner of Jerusalem, made molded image of Baals, incense in the valley of son of Hinnom. Again, these are related to child sacrifice places historically. So he did extremely deviant and wicked things. And you see, valley of Hinnom, and the same here has sent his son through fire, child sacrifice, burnt his children. So at least one son is referred to here, and perhaps multiple are referred to here. Now there came a turnover later on where Passover was celebrated, the house of God was repaired, various sacred pillars and so on, where all sorts of foreign things were destroyed and so on, and good things were reinstated. So from the time of building of Solomon's temple, this was the next time when they really enjoyed God and His presence in the temple. If I remember correctly, that's actually Hezekiah's time. Now Manasseh, what did Manasseh do? He went against his father, her father's pattern, did all sorts of evil things again. Witchcraft, consulting spirits and mediums. Asherah, another female goddess, he did that, broke many commandments. So again, went against the pattern which his father had set in southern Judah. Josiah, Manasseh, so after Manasseh, Josiah came, and he was a very good king. By the way, we have Operation Stephen at the present minute, God strengthening, the next operation which is currently being worked on, which is training and raising up Bible teachers. Like how you can see So far we're only browsing through things, because an evangelist needs to have a rough idea, an overview of all these things, and I'm hoping some of the evangelists would pick up on their own during their personal studies and learn furthermore. But an introduction is what I see as necessary during Operation Stephen. But Operation Josiah is about proper teaching, and there we would go through systematic, again like a year and more, purely on the Bible and Bible alone, not caring about what's sitting there outside the Bible. And that operation is named after Josiah, Operation Josiah. And the reason is that during Josiah's time, actually God testified about Josiah saying, after King David there was no one like Josiah. Josiah was almost like King David in spiritual stature. And Josiah was a very lovely man. During his time the temple was had been completely in disrepair. He did, because his father Manasseh and his great grandfather Ahaz had caused all sorts of issues. Hezekiah's reforms weren't lasting, and therefore during the time of Josiah the temple was in disrepair. Not many even knew about Yahweh properly. They didn't know about Mosaic covenant properly, and so on. And now they suddenly find the Mosaic law, the book, which was deposited in the ark, inside the ark, and that of course wasn't there apparently, and that's why they couldn't find it. But they found it when they were cleaning the temple, because Josiah began with a good heart, but he didn't know much. All that he knew was, this is my God, I need to worship him. So he appointed people to clean up the place. When cleaning up, they found the book, and they essentially brought the book to Josiah's attention. And Josiah then had to based on that, you find an avalanche of reformation in the nation of Judah. Josiah asked for public reading, public praying, appointment of teachers, destroyed big time. Every idol in the land went to destroy big time those things, and the nation was brought back to God in a reasonably proper way. Except the problem was, God wasn't happy. This is huge reformation, but God had already got fed up. By the time of Ahaz, especially with things that culminated in Ahaz, God got fed up. So Josiah, even though was a very lovely man, his reformation weren't going to change God's heart. But God did testify of him. So Josiah burned the high places, public reading, book of the covenant, destroyed all idols, Baal, sun god, moon god, constellation, Asherah, Molech, Ashtoreth, Chemosh, Milcom, horses dedicated to the sun, Tophet, where the valley of son of Hinnom. This is the name of a place, by the way. Jeroboam's high place, and even in northern Israel, he went even to northern Israel to destroy some of the high places there. Even though by that time northern Israel was supposed to have been ruled by Assyrians. Despite that, Jeroboam was there, destroyed. Passover, the first time after Samuel's time, they were celebrating a proper Passover in the way that Passover was supposed to be celebrated as during the time of Moses and Samuel. Such was the way in which Israel had messed up big time. Another thing, Sabbath year, for 490 years Israel hadn't kept the Sabbath year, which had ramifications, implications. They didn't take care of the land properly, they didn't take care of the servants properly. In other words, they were ill-treating the servants. They abused power. Rich were getting richer, poor were getting poorer. No one who was there to seek for justice of the needy and the oppressed and the widows and all those people. And so God had to use that as a reference point and decide to send southern Judah also into exile for 70 years. 1 year for every 7 years, 490 years, for 70 years, sent for the land to have Sabbath and the things of the land to have Sabbath. And then during the time of Emperor Cyrus, King Cyrus, Cyrus the Great of Persia. After 70 years, Israel came back. But as you can see, Israel messed up big time. I haven't gone into issues that individuals had. Individuals sin, unless of course they are they are kings. By the way, where the reason I mentioned about Ahaz and King David and so on, Eli and so on, is the fact that the way in which this nation operated, when the leader led the way, the nation followed. And so when the leader Ahaz, for example, installed a few different temples, the nation went into severe idolatry. They unfortunately, even though there were prophets, and some of the prophets were, and there were plenty of false prophets, and some of them were true prophets, even though the true prophets were crying out day in, day out, even though that was the case, the king's authority meant the nation slid in. And that's why we were looking at individuals. As you can see, a catalog of issues. What else could have gone wrong? Everything that could go wrong. Almost. I didn't really think through carefully. I haven't spent, maybe I should spend hours to try and see if they have sort of not messed up in any regard. But as far as I can see, in every way, broadly speaking, every way they could mess up, they have messed up. Okay, and so where did Israel end up in? 2 Kings chapter 17 verses 7 to 41. Let me briefly show you those verses, by the way. 2 Kings 17, 7 to 41 was a summary of Israel's and Judah's sins. I can show you. It's a long passage. I won't read the entire passage, but it's something like, so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. So God brought them out, but what did Israel do? They walked in the statutes of the nations whom the Lord had cast out. Whatever the previous inhabitants did, the Israel did that. Did those same things. Secretly did against the Lord their God things that were not right. Secretly, as in, of course, God would know every secret, but they intended their behavior to be secret sometimes. But God had known about those things. They set for themselves sacred pillars and so on. Israel, this is northern Israel. When it says Israel here, by the way, this is northern Israel. The name Israel, depending on the context, could mean one of many different things. The individual, the family, the tribe, the small tribe, the large tribe with the land, which is a nation, and then the northern nation of Israel. So all sorts of different meanings. So you need to be careful as to what it really means when the term Israel is used. But yeah, this is northern Israel as opposed to southern Judah. And then God would go on to say, and also Judah did not keep the commandments, but walked in the statutes of Israel. I.e., just like how Israel did, Judah did. They rejected and therefore Lord rejected them, and so on. So you find so that's sort of a rough idea of the kinds of things that the nation of Israel did. And judgment of Judah, I'll show you perhaps that also briefly. What happened to the website? Something went wrong there. Impending judgment of Judah. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath. This is nevertheless being despite I think Josiah's reformation. Fierceness from his fierceness of his great wrath, with which his anger was aroused against Judah because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I said Ahaz. No, it's actually Manasseh who God was fed up with. I do apologize, sincerely apologize. Manasseh is Ahaz's grandson, Hezekiah's son. And Manasseh has provoked, and the Lord said, I will also remove Judah from my sight as I have removed Israel. I will cast off the city. My name, the city after my name, I'm going to cast them out. So you see the issues there. What happened here? Cool. So that's where Israel ended up in. Note lessons for Christians. Well, we better be careful. We really better be careful. Jezebel. Revelation 2 talks about Jezebel in the church. So we need to ask the question, who is this Jezebel? Who is this? What is the pattern of behavior which has brought an idolatry into the church based on foreign religions, based on foreign things? A foreign lady, a spiritual lady who has led people into immorality, and he uses the term sexual immorality, but actually, like I said earlier, if you understand the Old Testament pattern, sexual immorality goes hand in hand with spiritual immorality. And who is this who has mingled, who has combined Christian doctrine with completely non-Christian doctrine? To an extent, it's unrecognizable today. We need to ask the question, who is Balaam today? Balaam, the Bible says, Revelation, Balaam's acts are there in one particular church. Of course, in Revelation 2, it's talking about a particular church of the first century. But the question we need to ask is, they messed up. Are we messing up? What is the pattern? Are we messing up in the same pattern? Are questions we need to ask. Another question I really like to ask is this. Tolerating things which are ungodly, unscriptural, what level of hatred must we have? And here is where my strong encouragement to all of us is going to be this. If anyone knows anything about the Old Testament, the more he knows, the more the stronger his conviction would be, which is that even in the New Testament it is the same God. Paul reminds us our God is a consuming fire, and he picks that expression from the Old Testament. He's reminding them, remember in the olden days God consumed you. In the Old Testament there were occasions where literally fire came out from the temple and consumed people, literally destroyed people, killed people. And Paul was reminding, but we are worshipping the same God, even though it's a new covenant. In other words, when you appreciate the fact that it is the same God, and when you know, the more you know the Old Testament, you would really get to know how rigidly or how strictly we need to hold our doctrine. Any contamination of the doctrine is serious. Personally, for me, there's a particular mandate God has given me, things that I need to do in the future. With those things in mind, for me, my mind works like a machine, like an engine. I know many people come and say, oh, we need to be, maybe you need to put up with this doctrine, or maybe you need to give them time and so on. In my mind, I can give all time. I'm not God to destroy anyone. I have not the authority. But when it comes to things which are unscriptural, my mindset is, I'll go there, say it. This is unscriptural. You better deal with it. If I don't say it, I'll be in trouble. You'll be in trouble. And I know that because I know the Old Testament. And even though I don't live, you don't live, we don't live in the Old Testament, the fact of the matter is, the God of the Old Testament is still the same. The one who destroyed, God of the Old Testament, by the way, isn't a very bad God in the Old Testament and suddenly has become benevolent in the New Testament. No, even popular apologists, I've seen many popular people who you might be familiar with also trying to make such excuses by saying, you know what, but those are Old Testament times, things are different today. I see, I don't want to name names, but very good people I respect, and very popular people seem to make those points, and I'm thinking, no, you got the theology wrong there. What is different between the Old Testament and the New Testament is not that God has changed or His wrath has changed. You're going to see all the wrath of God during the times of things that that are predicted in the book of Revelation. You're going to see all of that happen. When they happen, you will realize life for Israel was much better. And so things are going to be terrible. And those things are going to be from the hand of God. The only difference between the Old and the New Testament was the cross of Jesus. In the Old Testament times, you had rams and goats and so on, which you have to offer again and again and again to quench the wrath of God, to prevent His proper justice being implemented, judgment being implemented, which is a system that He gave. Even the offerings, but it is because the precious Son Jesus was sacrificed. He is eagerly waiting. It's almost as if someone is ready to punch, but then because he sees the one in front of him is his son, he is doing that. But he's seeing that this is a serious issue. When time is up, the punch would happen, and at that time all bets are off. So the point is, church should not be confused. I see across the church, like I said, my dear friends, even some people who you might eagerly follow, some people advocating tolerance towards things which are not of scriptural doctrine of the New Testament. Some of which we spoke of in our group chat, but many we haven't spoken of so far. Some people are, because they don't know, because they are evangelists. I don't think they have studied the Old Testament properly. I don't think they have studied the Bible properly. Maybe they have studied some other books properly, but not the Bible in detail. And therefore, in what they think is best, they are advocating some sort of compromise and tolerance of unscriptural things. But if, like I said, go through the pattern of the Old Testament, God destroyed Israel, God would destroy us. When I say destroyed, I mean He properly chastened them big time. Some of the things that happened to the nation of Israel hasn't happened so far to the church. It is the same God. We better be careful and take these things seriously. Let me read just one quick verse, and then let's open up the floor for questions, please. Sorry, I'm still not looking at YouTube so far, so I haven't checked if anyone has a question so far. But I'm hoping you're seeing this here verse, a simple verse. For if God did not spare the natural branches, where the natural branches, if you read the entire context, you'd find out that the natural branches are the people of the nation of Israel, were natural being. Ethnically, they are Israel. And what, if you read the thing before this, essentially the point is making is, Paul is making here is that God, when people in Israel disobeyed, He removed them. He still considers the nation of Israel in some other way. We're going to get into the details there. So please take my statements with a huge lump of salt now. The quick point is, God did certain things to Israel. Don't dare think He won't do that to you. After all, you are not even natural. In other words, me as a Tamil today, I'm not even of the same standing as a Jew who has come into the new covenant. From a purely ethnic perspective, Jews had a special role to play, and they still have a special role to play. More details to come. But the point here is, they are natural. I have been grafted in, artificially pushed in, grafted in. If God can remove them, He can remove me very easily. The point is, we better take our doctrine carefully. Many things to learn. I urge, especially because this is an Operation Stephen, and I understand we are training as evangelists, and evangelists tend to know only some portions of the Bible, and therefore they might take sort of a flexible view on some other things. Because of that, I really want to emphasize, please take the advice of teachers. God strengthening, we'd raise up many teachers in the future who God strengthening as part of Operation Josiah, who hopefully many of you would get to know on a day-to-day basis going forward. God strengthening, and therefore we'd mobilize as a huge army. But those who are teachers, please listen to them carefully and take these things seriously. Thank you very much. And now let's open up the floor for questions, comments, criticisms. Let me find out how we are doing in terms of time. We are 7 minutes late. That's fine. We are 7 minutes late, so we have caught up on a fair amount of time there. Questions, comments, criticisms, please, so far. Again, I see Brother Greg's question to me seems more related to session perhaps 4 mostly, and maybe somewhat to session 3. Okay, let's see in the group chat. Cool. Brother Craig makes a very, very good point. Remember, the nation of Israel was called out of Egypt. Brother Craig, of course, points to the fact that Jesus was called out of Egypt. And it's not just that Jesus was called out of Egypt. It's also the fact that what was a verse which would have ordinarily meant as reference to the nation of Israel, God used that to refer to Jesus. And the reason behind that is the same reason that I shared when Brother Steve asked a question about Isaiah 53, I think sometime last week or so, or maybe early this week, can't remember, where I pointed out to the fact that Isaiah 53, if you read Isaiah 49 and 48 and so on, you find two Israels there, one of them being the nation and another being the Messiah himself. Both of them called as Israel, both of them called as servants, but one of them was a benefactor, one of them was supposed to help the other, save the other, and the other is supposed to be saved by the first. So you find that relationship. In other words, Jesus is clearly called as Israel also. Jesus, by the way, in the Old Testament prophecies is called as David also. So there's a few different things, but we'll get some of these details in I think in either the next module or the one after that. We have a module where we look at Jesus as the Messiah, i.e. going through the Old Testament, figuring out why we think Jesus is the Messiah of the Old Testament. And so, yeah, a part of that is what Brother Craig is pointing out to there. Isaac, not Ishmael, that's true. Ishmael was loved, but not part of absolutely. And this is a mistake that sometimes Christians make, which is the Old Testament has many prophecies. Some of those prophecies correspond to the individual, whereas some others correspond to the nation. Sometimes people confuse them. For example, if you go to Malachi, and if you read the first chapter, first few verses, you would find a statement to the extent of saying, Israel I have loved, Esau I have hated. But the fact of the matter is, when you go through details, which we'd go through in one of our future modules anyway, you'd figure out that the Esau there is not the individual but the nation. And that's for a particular reason, I say that. So anyway, so things like that. Ishmael as an individual, God said that Ishmael, by the way, was named by God. Ishmael was named. There are a few people who are named by God himself in the Bible. Isaac was named by God. Ishmael was named by God. When I say named for the first time even. Of course, Jacob was also named by God as Israel. But for the first time, of course, Jesus himself in the bodily form was named by the eternal God. Jesus is eternal God. Bodily form named by the one who was prophesying and one who sent a message through an angel. Yeah, then the way we need to be extremely meticulous in how we say things, because easily things could be misconstrued, which is good. I mean, that's fine. Okay, Muhammad is not part of the Arabs. Whether Muhammad is from Ishmael, Muhammad is part of Arabs, but whether he is part of Ishmael is a huge question. Him in particular, and how much Ishmael, certainly I think Muslims haven't figured this out yet, but there's plenty of detail behind this. Okay, anyway, let's stick to the apologetics now. Still people disobeyed God, they were stubborn. Yes. Brother Menson says, Brother Arul, all of this you are mentioning, like temples and dynasties in the Bible, have historical records today. So this is where module 2 comes in. We have, like, if you go through the module, if you haven't gone through the content, please carefully go through them in detail. But module 2 provides the evidential background to many things that we are covering today and going forward, many things. So some specific things we'll cover their own specific historical background, but for many things, module 2 is the background. The point is, we have reasons to take the holistic picture, the broad outline of what we find in the Old Testament to be verifiable, evidential. So the framework is certainly evidential, and the context of the framework, through a particular logical case that we can make, we can clearly say that the rest of the things ought to be reliable also. In other words, we don't find archaeological artifacts for everything, for every king, for every event and so on, but we don't have to. We don't. No nation has that. But the crucial. But no nation has this. No nation has a consolidated work like that, preserving their history meticulously. In other words, this is a crucial historical record, not archaeological but historical record. No nation has it. Israel has it, which is phenomenal. So what we can do is, based on our analysis, we can confidently take this to be true. Sister Hafsa, yes, God is still a consuming fire. Absolutely. We're going to find, especially some of the end time prophecies, you should go through. Phenomenal. Okay. Brother Greg, are we going to cover the Jezebel spirit later? Which is a good question. Let me see. How are we doing in terms of time? We still have 2 more minutes. But is there any other question at all? Jezebel spirit. If there is no question, maybe I'll take the 2 minutes now to cover that. Let me just give 2 minutes or so. And while I'm waiting for any other question which may come through, by the way, let me quickly check. I think Brother Greg's question is for session 4, so I'm not going to go through that now. I'm trying to see if there's any other question via email, because I know there's at least one sister who's logged in who's not part of the training batch yet, because she wants to experiment first. And I wanted to see if she has sent any question. I don't see any so far. Okay, cool. What is Brother Darren saying? Hebrew Israelites, Hebrew roots, British Israelites argue that the Gentiles being cut off, Northern Kingdom or Hellenistic Jews, despite Cornelius. Okay, Hebrew Israelites, Hebrew roots and British Israelism argue for the Gentiles being the cut off Northern Kingdom. I see. Yep. Or Hellenistic Jews, despite Cornelius. What despite Cornelius? What distinctive verses would you use? Cool. No, with so just so you understand, in terms of for the rest of the people who are listening, various parties have brought in various confusing things, theology, and one of the family of confusing theology is in terms of stealing away the identity of the nation of Israel, and this is where Black Israelite movement does that. British Israelite movement does that. Believe it or not, there are people, and I don't think they've become popular yet so far, thankfully, but there are people who claim Britain and the US are Israel. And there are all sorts of similar ideas, all sorts of ideas which are out there, mainly these two, the first being more prominent than even the second in terms of numbers. That's stealing away the identity. Brother Darren is asking, how do we, what kind of scriptural background can we use to deal with this? No, in this, okay, scriptural background, okay, my logic of arguing that, I'm thinking aloud. I'm speaking aloud as I'm thinking, and my point is going to be, number one, we know who the nation of Israel, including the northern Israel, who the nation of Israel was and is, even going up to the 1st century. We know. James writes to them. Peter seemingly writes to them. We also know the Samaritans, in terms of history, are a mixed group between portion of northern Israel and foreigners. So we know a brief background of where to expect to find, and that is amongst the Samaritans and amongst a people group which Peter and James were writing to. What we do know also is that that Africans, Caribbeans and so on haven't changed their geographical location since then, or even before then. Certainly before that, the time of the particular points I am talking about, Samaritans and the intended audience for James and Peter, we know where Africans were, and they weren't the audience for Peter and James. Put them all together for Africans and Caribbeans. I think it's mainly Caribbean as far as I can see, mostly Caribbean, but certainly some African parts as far as I can see. In terms of background, I'm not saying necessarily people who are still in the Caribbean islands, but who have a background in Caribbean islands. The point is, they haven't got a case. For them to claim that they are Northern Israel, they need to now rewrite history going back to the 1st century. They need to provide evidence of Peter's epistles being written to them in where they come from, as opposed to finding it in the places where we find it. So that's the deal. And of course, the same thing would apply for British Israelism. Same sort of logic would. So point would be, nope. Those things are not tenable historical claims. Brother Manson, is Israel still the promised land until today? Absolutely. And this is one of the things we're going to look at in sessions 3 and session 4. Israel ethnically is still an entity which is God's firstborn son, which has a land allocated for them, which should have been respected, which we haven't respected. You need to ask the question, this is where we're going to discuss details of crusades and so on in upcoming modules. And I know again some popular Christian apologists are advancing the idea that crusades helped us and so helped the church and so on. I'm going to bring in a very many theologically sophisticated, historically credible points in one of our future modules, where I'm going to say no, the church would have been much better off without the crusades. It completely distorts the purpose of church, the image of church, the recognition of church, and so on. Multiple different ways. The church needn't have acquired the land of Israel at all. Politicians could have, but even then the land should have been given back to the nation of Israel, ethnic Israel, straight away. To stay there and say this is my holy land is the lamest of theological mistakes people can do. And that is what some people have done, many people have done. And these are severe problems in history. And therefore, and we are going to cover some of those details later. But the point now certainly is the promised land, which is, by the way, much wider, much bigger than what it is today, belongs to ethnic Israel. Galatians. Greg, Matthew 19:28. Is anyone else losing signal? Okay, Galatians 3:28. Internet pause. Okay. Matthew 19:28. Okay, let me see what Matthew 19:28 says. Yes, 12 tribes, yes, absolutely. So let's look at some of these things in our modules 3 and 4, which should lay proper theological grounding for Israel's relevance even today. Now, quickly going to Jezebel, if we can. Let me see. Can we? No, we've run out of time already. But quick comments about Jezebel, and now we are behind time. The quick comment is, historically, who is Jezebel? A foreign lady, a lady who is a queen, who married into a king of northern Israel, a legitimate king of Israel, married into, and therefore brought in a connection, brought in, and then after establishing that connection, which should have never happened, but after establishing that connection, essentially leading the entire northern nation of Israel into serious idolatry, most of idolatry which actually comes from the nation she comes from. That's what happened. This led to Jezebel. If you study the biblical account, I said earlier, land in the nation of Israel are split for different tribes by Mosaic covenant. But what Jezebel did, when Ahab wanted to have some land which the Israelite owner refused to give him, Jezebel took charge, killed the owner of the land, took that away, and then used it for her and her husband. Questions that we need to ask is, in the New Testament, in the New Testament times, where do we see this? The one who is supposed to be the true king being related to a false queen, someone who purports to be a queen who shouldn't have been a queen, false queen coming in, establishing a relationship, and then based on that taking the land of Israel, taking away the land of Israel, trampling it, making use of it for herself and for her family, leading people into idolatrous behavior. Even those who can genuinely become Christians into that idolatry. Who is doing this is the crucial question we need to ask. And I'm going to, we God Strengthening would look at historical details to a much greater degree sometime in one of our future modules. But the point is, you would find that Queen of Heaven is what is purported to be, who is called the Mary and the apparitions of Mary and Fatima and this and that and so on. Someone who is not of God, who shouldn't be associated with God, the king, shouldn't be associated with him, but someone who comes in, associates herself with him, and then leads who were supposed to be genuine followers of God away from God, and then takes the land away from Israel and so on. Who is this? The religious practices of Catholicism are very close, Roman Catholicism, very, very close to what's happening here. And so it's hard to miss that parallel. But anyway, but even aside from this, we're going to look at some specific historical details of how Roman Catholicism emerged, Orthodoxy emerged in history, and then we are going to try and establish if the practices in these quarters are really biblical. Or when I say biblical, what I really mean is the first century church practice. Is that the practice in these quarters? If it is not, we better give up on them, on those practices, and come lock, stock and barrel, give up. Come as who you are, with only your idea to follow God, to God, ask for forgiveness and follow God faithfully. God is willing to forgive by all means, but not when we rebel, not when we insist we'll stay with our ideas and somehow marry those ideas with God's ideas. It can't happen. Alright, cool. That is a few comments. That's a few statements as a way of commenting on that. Sister Heidi says, okay. Sister Heidi says, crusades are a reaction towards offensive Islam. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, okay, possibly. There are multiple issues with that. Politicians advancing, I understand. An army advancing, I understand. But as Christians advancing, there are serious issues. But leaving that aside, why were the Crusaders resident in Israel? Once they have defeated, what were they doing there? If their concern was purely Islam, which is included, I certainly see the political angle to it. In terms of offense against Islam, I certainly see that also. But I certainly see more things happening than that. And we should look at things we should look at all aspects. Why were those people stationary there? Why did they stay there? Is my question. And that is where I think I'm going to differ on you, Sister Heidi. Okay, signal issues. Is it because the output is bad from here? Perhaps the output is bad. Sister Heidi, I think so your point, if it is not for the Crusades, the whole Europe will be another Islamic land. No, not really. If the church had been the church it should have been, which it wasn't, we wouldn't have had anyone destroying our lands. You know, the solution that God has in the New Testament times for the issues of this world is not political mainly. It includes political solutions also. If Christians rule a particular land or rule their own homeland, but the main solution is the church. And the church has a mandate to spread the gospel, to give their lives for the gospel. But what we find is during the Dark Ages, the church was doing nothing which it was supposed to do. The church was incapacitated. The church was, the knowledge of scriptures was removed from the church. The church really wasn't church for many centuries. And that was the problem because of which Islam advanced. Islam could advance through sword, but no one could convert people if the church had really done what we were supposed to do. Very, very important. I know popular preachers, some of whom I don't want to name, that we know of, are advancing that idea. But I'm really, from my perspective, I'm clearly telling you what I think you need to consider seriously. Now you can take both of them together and then use the Bible and evaluate and come to conclusions. If the church was genuinely what it is today in the UK, we don't have to fear anything. The Muslims can do whatever they want to. Anyone else can. The Hindus can do whatever they want to. The Buddhists can do, try. When I say do, I mean try to do whatever they want to. If the church genuinely was like in the time of the Acts of the Apostles, no one would give in to Islam. No one would, well, when I say no one, no sensible one, which I'm hoping many people would give in to any of these ideas. We don't have to fear any takeover, because the church would be taking over not through political means but through the message of the gospel across the world. And even today, I think we need to really focus on that. I'm not suggesting that I don't care about politics, by all means, please, I'm not suggesting that at all. But politics has a different role to play. Politicians have a different role to play. Governments, secular governments have a different role to play. Governments of Christian majority nations have a different role to play, which might at times look, mostly look Christian. But my point is, but the church has to do its role. The church has to spread the gospel. The church has to invest time and effort in making the gospel available in its entire splendor to people across the world. The only thing we'd find when we do that sincerely and properly is that even if Muslims come to spread anything, they'll become Christians. Like how you might know, I have many friends who are, when I say friends, many people who I know a little bit who are Muslims, and I can see, I can see where they're coming from. And I partly blame the church for why they are still what they are. No, partly, not entirely, partly. So all these things are important. We really need to get serious with the Bible, with the Word of God, with the history, with the first century history, especially with the history of the church properly, and advance things. Protecting people in the Holy Land. That is why they stayed there. Okay. Protecting people in the Holy Land is not allowing the nation of Israel settle down there, which is what partially happened. Until 1948, the nation of Israel, the ethnic Israelites, had very little place to call their own to settle down in. And so I don't care what protection people offered. If what was God given land to particular people weren't handed over to them properly, something has gone wrong seriously. That's what I'd say. Okay, cool. Is the Catholic Church responsible in the distribution of the Bible, or did not stop the printing? Did stop the printing of the Bible? They even guided people on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Well, for Christians, there is no Holy Land. This entire idea that Jerusalem, Israel, is a Holy Land, I can understand from the Old Testament perspective. We can appreciate, we can study a lot, we can connect back to the Old Testament times. But for a Christian, in the new covenant, no land is holy under the new covenant. Jesus made that point extremely clear. The ones who worship God, worship Him in spirit and truth. The time is coming when you don't worship in Jerusalem. You worship anywhere, everywhere. So that idea, the Holy Land, all these ideas are unbiblical ideas. Israel, the land mass, belongs to the ethnic Israelites, which should have been handed over to them right at the start. If the entire intention is to help them out, they should have been helped out, and then the land should have been given, and that did not happen quite demonstrably. But okay, let's keep this conversation maybe for later. North Africa's history before and after. Sister Heidi, I certainly understand Islamic influence. My point is, we must also study the history of the church properly, right from the first century. What happened, when, why? Why do we have all sorts of different people with completely wacky ideas also claiming to be Christians? We should ask those, where did these things come from? And so on. We should ask all those questions really carefully. Now, my point again is, if what I am saying is true, scripturally, historically, we need to take it seriously, regardless of our current affiliations, is my point. So my point, absolutely Islam, we need to study, Sister Heidi, but we need to study the church history also. Why should translating the Bible mean people were burnt at stake? We need to ask. Islam had no role to play in that. We need to ask, how come this happened? Someone translating the Bible, why would that be a problem? Translating to common tongue, vernacular, why would that be a problem? Did not Jesus have common people, not Pharisees, not Sadducees, as his disciples, apostles initially, fishermen, and so on? So these are, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, time for break. Do apologize about my ranting, and let's take a break now. I think we have gone over time by 15 or 20 or so minutes. Let's take a 10-minute break and then